Now, at the same time, when I think about Philadelphia, I think about the fact that, just like Chicago, right? In 2013, we had, 23 schools closed. And we had like 95% of the children that go to those schools were Black and brown children. Kicking down the road situation when it comes to the majority of our children tends to be kind of the theme in Philadelphia. So every single politician, every mayor election, every city council election, education's one of the top 3 issues for like the last 2 decades. But we're still producing.
That's good. At least they talking about it.
They talk a lot about it.
Right.
And sometimes that happens more than actually what is happening on the ground.
Right.
So like as an educator, I've seen the fact that, I read a research thing in 1988, the average year experience of a teacher in Philadelphia was 15 years. Now it's 3 to 5 years. So you're getting a situation where most people don't even stay in the system long enough to gain the skills to be effective enough to be the teacher that's necessary for the children that need to be serviced the most.
We are in our second city of Philadelphia. Welcome to the New Niagara Tour. Again, I'm back with friends. I want to just make sure you know who is in the room with us. My brother Chris is back with us. We have Jay, and then we have our Philadelphia expert, educator, and just all around good dude and friend. We got Ish. Thank you for being with us, Ish.
Yeah.
So what we wanted to do is, before we hop into what we expect here in Philadelphia, we just did Memphis not too long ago, and we had some learning. So I want to just throw it to you all just off the top. What stood out to you from Memphis? And let me start with you, Jay. Ladies first.
Well, the first thing that stood out is we had a great turnout. So, major shout out to Memphis Lift for helping us with getting the turnout there. Our numbers increased like overnight. So Ms. Renee, Ms. Danisha, all of y'all, shout out to you. It was great to have that. What stood out to me as far as what we discovered was how well informed everybody was about what was happening in Memphis. Like when we brought up politics, they knew who the electeds were. They knew where the accountability was or should be. There was a lot that people had to say, which was great because I don't think that people have been in spaces like that where people are hearing what they have to say. And so you always talk about agency. I felt like that was very present.
And Chris, anything from you?
I think the most revealing thing to me is that we were there to talk to them about education, but they said a lot about safety and jobs and community-based issues that are economically based, which is why I think they knew who their electeds were. Like the mayor is doing some new things that the last one didn't. They were very aware of that. And then it's just like it hit me how broken the system is too. I mean, they got kids going to school in Ubers. They got kids like they don't have transportation for everybody, right? Just basic stuff we take for granted in other parts of the country. They were able to articulate it. And I think sometimes we think too small about education. We're thinking about like these really narrow, discrete issues, and they opened my eyes up. It should have already been open, but they opened my eyes up to how much more is going on in their lives.
Yeah, and I have a few, just some key takeaways that we got from the crowd there. But before, I'd be remiss, our good brother Sharif is here with us in spirit, but he's not with us for a good reason. He is receiving an award from the city of Philadelphia today, right during this time. So, but Ish was ready, and I'm so grateful for you, brother. So, team, and here's some of the things. Here were the key takeaways from our Memphis session. One was the main drivers of the educational challenges there were cited as poverty, a lack of resources, and insufficient accountability. Safety, crime, and economic instability were significant concerns for parents and students alike. Political engagement and advocacy is critical to driving systemic change there. And they did say they had some really successful models and programs, but they need to be replicated and scaled. And then finally, they said community and parental involvement were essential components for improving the educational outcomes. So when we go into that room and we're talking to those people, we had clergy in that room, we had educators, we had parents, we had students. There were a lot of key moments there where like the parents were really talking about like the crime there and some of their policies and things of that nature, which I know Jay can kind of go into a little bit more. What stuck out for me was how important organizations like the Memphis Lift and Miss Sarah was in that community, like there were a lot of community-based organizations that had to be the push. And what they did say is that they had hope in this new superintendent that was coming because she was doing so much work with those orgs. Before we bring you in, Ish, I want to just throw it to you, Jay, just around some of the political pieces that you heard, because I felt like the mood, like there was a lot of energy on some of their political pieces. I know that was the section that you were in charge of.
Yeah, and the other thing that was interesting about our section is that the students were really engaged. And it was actually kind of heartbreaking at first, because when we first started, we had 3 students at our tables, and they kind of had their phones, and they was just sitting there, and they weren't really engaged. And one of the students said, the reason why I wasn't really engaged is that when we're at our schools, they don't really want us to say anything. And so then when we started asking them questions, like they too knew about the political landscape. And so just to speak back to what you said about what we found out, that insufficient accountability came from the political landscape, and feeling like the politicians, the elected leaders that are in their communities don't mirror their communities, for one, and the ones that are there, they're not really held accountable for actions. And there really was a disconnect between what parents and students felt like needed to be moving the needle forward and what they were being presented with or given by ways of votes and legislation. And they really were very adamant about, we need to have this change on the school board level, state level, local level. It was very, very serious.
And Ish, I wanted to just bring you in, but let me point out these 2 things and I'll throw it to you. There were 2 things that they had a big reaction to. One was this 21-point system,
the safety
and it was basically around crime and young people. So if a young person was to get some kind of trouble, they get to accrue points up until these 21 points before something would happen. The parents were not, the parents and educators were not amused by that
at all.
And then there was
TCAP.
TCAP. Can you explain what the TCAP was?
The TCAP is their state assessment. And so it's a state standard that all the grades have to take between 3 and 12th grade in order for them to advance to the next grade level. The challenge that all the parents were speaking about was that a student can be doing well throughout the school year, but if they don't pass that TCAP, they don't advance to the next grade. And so it's really limiting people. Like what they specifically said, what about people who have test anxiety? Like there actually is a thing. And also it creates an environment where you're teaching to a test. And so there's no accountability again to what about all these other things that my child may know, or what about all these other things that these students are learning that really aren't being validated by way of how they should be advancing. It's all based off of this TCAP.
Yeah, it was a big reaction. So, we're here in Philly, and before we got to the Philly stuff, Ish, I wanted you to be able to respond to that, but let me give you a little context of what the new Niagara is. It's based off of W.E.B. Du Bois from back in the day when he used to have the Niagara Bible College in Niagara Falls, where the NAACP creation eventually came from. We wanted to go to towns and talk to Black people that's impacted by education there and just gain like some knowledge and information on the ground around how they're feeling about it. So there's 5 cities we're going to. It's Memphis, Philly, Atlanta, Houston, and Chicago. And so we've only knocked out Memphis, and now we're here in Philly with you. So before we pivot to Philly, do you have just, any thoughts or reactions to, what you quickly just heard about Memphis?
Well, what I heard about Memphis is the same issues all those other cities you just named are going through, with the challenges with poverty, the challenges with, a lack of accountability for politicians. It's like the same thing in every major city. So like I could have closed my eyes and heard Philadelphia be described by the way you just described what the challenges and issues are facing folks in Memphis. And, just to speak real briefly on the TCAP, I find that's like accountability done gone wrong.
Yeah.
What are you trying to hold accountability? Here, are you trying to hold folks' ability to teach exactly to the test and have students regurgitate that on that at the end of the thing, and that will determine if the child can move forward? Why happens if there's a log jam, right? What if certain communities are kind of left out of that equation? Why if they don't have a certified teacher in front of them all year round? There's so many other factors, and then applying these blanket accountability measures onto such a subjective reality of as the human element found in schools does a huge detriment to what education actually is, and actually devalues what schools should be doing in the communities that they're serving. So when I'm hearing that in Memphis, I'm like, my Lord, man, that's the next level of accountability. And, you know, just it being used in that way to the point where parents are now saying, wait a minute, you're over testing my child almost. You're using it at the detriment of my child's education and their opportunities. So I just find that really interesting that you see that also in all the cities you just named, especially in schools that serve primarily Black children.
Yeah, and I'm interested to hear what we learn in these other cities. And what we'll do is we're getting this data in all these places, and then we'll do some comparing and contrasting. But let's just stay here for a little bit because, you know, I just published a report in partnership with Brightbeam and in Oakland, and it's called Proficiency Over Pageantry. And what we saw was there was a lot of grade inflation, but kids weren't proficient. Now, I feel how you feel about the TCAP, right? I think that it's a good start, but it kind of goes off the rails. It should be holding that system accountable instead of punishing those people. So if you got these kids that think that they're doing well, and then you put something that's supposed to be proving their proficiency, if they're missing it in the swash that we saw in Memphis, I don't know if those families should be the ones that should be being punished. But like you said, what if you get these 80% loss rates or fail rates, then that place is required to have, you know, licensed educators in front of them, or that opens them up for more funding to get, you know, to make sure that that's rectified. And then you kind of see some progress there. But
and in that report, Charles, you mentioned how most of the students who thought they were on grade level actually weren't on grade level. And I feel like that same energy was resonated to the parents who were saying, my child can do well all year, but then take this one exam and not advance. So there's also that disconnect there between what families believe education to be and what they're actually being, you know, expected to receive.
I mean, there was just a report not too long ago by Learning Heroes put out that said 92% of parents thought that their kids were on grade level. Even in states where 20% of them were on grade level, right? And this isn't just one kind of parent. This includes middle class and white parents and everybody else. They all think that their kids are doing well, and in every population, they're not. Right, like we tend to center this conversation sometimes on subgroups, racial subgroups. There's no group, actually, including people with 2 college-educated parents who are knocking it out of the park, but the parents all think so. So this is why I got to say the thing about the testing. The TCAP might be a little bit
extreme.
I wouldn't say that. So let me say it differently then, right? You get a blood pressure test and you can't base all of your health decisions around that one blood pressure test. It's telling you one thing, and if you just go after blood pressure, your cholesterol might get raised, right? In the process, right? Something else might happen. You could lower your blood pressure and still get diabetes, right? But the blood pressure test is important.
It's essential.
It is important if you care about heart attacks and strokes and all those other things. It's just not the only thing. But there's a reason why you get that once a year, hopefully once a year. People listening, you know, after a certain age, hopefully you are paying attention to it. That's how I feel about the TCAP a little bit.
And I think, and again, I actually agree with you. I wouldn't take that away. I think that you need these barometers to kind of tell you where you are as an educator. I think that who is being punished is somewhat of an issue. I also think that there are multiple ways that you can prove proficiency throughout, right? Like, I know gamification is a big term, but there's a lot like, hey, that's why some of these self-starting classrooms now, like when we went to Indianapolis that one time, and young people are progressing to the next level once they prove proficiency. So you can be 14 years old, but be doing junior level work because you've demonstrated over and over that you're proficient in this. I think that if the TCAP was working in that kind of way, not to hold young people back, but you know, Jay said this last time, I don't think people understand or know what proficiency is. Like, what does it mean to be proficient? Because in Oakland, it was, our study was with 300 plus students. We have a student fellowship. They learned how to go out and administer surveys. They built this scientific survey, and they got to talk to almost 350 of their fellow classmates. So they would ask their fellow classmates, do you feel like you are proficient? Do you feel like you're doing well? Well, I got good grades. These are kids in leadership. And so 80% said that they felt that they were proficient or above. The actual data shows that only 2 out of 10 Black and or brown students are actually proficient in language arts, and math was, I think, even worse.
Mhm.
And so there was a disconnect
Mhm.
between, and these are young people that wanted to learn. These are young people that were actually really engaged. These were young people that so once we got this data, those young people took it upon themselves to start going to their teachers and their principals saying, am I proficient?
Right.
What grade level am I reading on? What grade level am I doing math on? And when students have to do that, not parents, not teachers, not the system, when students have to be the people asking that question, I think something is broken. Something is wrong. But you are one of the most champion educators here. I know you go through a lot here. And I just have a lot of respect for you. Ish, like from an educator standpoint, and just with what you've been through here in Philly, just give me your thoughts. I know you're big on students having agency. I know you're big on students doing self-guided learning and things like that. So give us that educator juice of a Philly, of a gritty Philly educator.
Gritty Philly.
Gritty
Don't say
Philly.
gritty. Right.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to do it justice.
Yeah.
I would say first that, one of the things a lot of people don't talk about is the neglect of social studies in the younger grades.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm biased towards that subject since that's my specialty. But the fact that children aren't reading and comprehending and connecting pieces that you can do through social studies and humanities, if done correctly, especially at the early grades, all the research shows that that's the best way to do it. But if you talk to most folks who teach in K-5 spaces, they're always like, I don't have time to teach social studies, or they don't have the background themselves. So that means that students aren't having the material being put in front of them where they can comprehend and connect these pieces in the way that needs to be connected. So if you go to private schools, that's like the kind of roundtable discussions even young kids in elementary schools have with those teachers in those school places. So like it becomes what is proficient, but like, how do we get there?
Yeah.
Do we get there by having our children sit in rows and waving their hands, in strict uniform lines? And not saying that that's not a place for that, but I'm saying, like, what are we replicating when we're putting our children in those situations? Right? So like, it's not good for anybody, regardless of the racial identity across the country, right? But when you're talking about in the building itself, like, how are our children being treated? Are they being humanized? Are they being dehumanized in that process? Which unfortunately a lot of factories, test factories, mills have produced. Now, at the same time, when I think about Philadelphia, I think about the fact that, just like Chicago, right? In 2013, we had, 23 schools closed. And we had like 95% of the children that go to those schools were Black and brown children, right? And so like the kicking down the road situation when it comes to the majority of our children tends to be kind of the theme in Philadelphia. So every single politician, every mayor election, every city council election, education's one of the like top 3 issues for like the last 2 decades.
Well, that's
but we're
good.
still producing.
That's good.
At least they talking about it.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. At least they talk
they
about
talk
it.
a lot about
Yeah,
it,
Right.
yeah.
and sometimes that happens more than actually what is happening on the ground.
Right.
So like, as an educator, I've seen the fact that, I read a research thing in 1988, the average year experience of a teacher in Philadelphia was 15 years. Now it's 3 to 5 years. So you're getting a situation where most people don't even stay in the system long enough to gain the skills to be effective enough to be the teacher that's necessary for the children that need to be serviced the most. And then that also leads to kind of an isolation, racial isolation, along with a social economic isolation of poverty within this city in Philadelphia. So you have the best school in the state of Pennsylvania here in Philadelphia. We have Black children that live in, some of the worst parts of the city that attend that school. That's a good thing, right? Well, the majority of children that live in that neighborhood don't go to schools like that, never have an opportunity to be exposed to that type of academics or have the type of consistency when it comes to the teachers in front of that child at that school that they're going to. You know what I mean? So we kind of have that contradiction where we do have like models of bubbles where we can point to, be like, look, there's successful models. And I think I saw that in the Memphis report, right? But then at the same time, the majority of our children, Black and brown children living in poverty, are neglected from the benefits and the privileges associated with going to those type of schools in the city of Philadelphia, where you have, again, the best school in Pennsylvania and also the worst school at the same time. And that's just crazy within itself.
what I heard in that I think is important to this Niagara situation. Number one, good on you for having students in the room and engaging them, because we got to stop having these type of meetings without real students in the room.
Right.
So good on you for that, and hearing from them. I hope we do a lot more of that. A lot of us who do education advocacy talk about the type of schools, the type of governance of schools and all that. But this thing around what engages students, when you were just talking, this is what it reminded me of. I know so many people that will bring up a book that we all supposedly read, like 1984 or something by Jane Austen or Dickens.
Oh, that's getting lost.
I slept walk through all those books. So I will know people in the room who would say, yeah, you remember in, and I'll be like, no, I slept. But why did I become a good reader reading on my own the stuff I cared about?
Right.
And why am I a good writer today? It's not because in school I was paying attention to, I was disconnected. And do we pay attention today about disconnected youth? We talk about schools, the type of schools, the teachers, whatever, and we rarely get around to school's boring. I'm just gonna be real with all y'all. I dare you as an adult to go back and spend a full day in
class
school.
wasn't boring.
Huh?
My class
He
wasn't
said
boring.
his class ain't boring.
You were blessed, but you were blessed.
But what you just said about social studies being a hook,
Yeah.
that's because of relevance.
Right.
That's because I can see myself. Jane Austen doesn't do anything for me. To this day, I don't know why people have a canon where they like, am I wrong for this?
Like,
what I'm saying right now?
Have we not had an elevation in literature that we're still reading the same? Like,
I mean,
our
probably.
students should not be reading
Jane Austen.
Right.
Here's the thing, though. I do think with where things are today, I think 1984 is a super relevant book right now. Like, I think 1984.
Did you read it?
I read 19. I absolutely read 1984.
Did you read it all the way through?
No, I did not. We on the same page.
Have you read
Yeah, same
1984? Basically, what 1984 did is predict exactly where we are now.
But you know what else is a good book like that? Is the Octavia book, Parable. Which is same context, but not.
Well, look, I'm not. I mean, listen, I'm not arguing to take any books out. Like, you know what I'm saying? I think there's a contingency of people that's trying to take books out. I think we should be putting books in that canon. I don't have a problem with that.
With the eye on it being relevant to. Is it a hook? That's my only question. Is, are our young people going to read it and think they see themselves in it, so they finish it?
But here's
I
the
didn't
thing.
finish most of these books.
But here's the thing that you're talking about something that I care deeply about, and I think this falls into the personal and communal agency piece. Most of the things that I learned, whether it's speaking publicly, being able to produce shows like this, or the skill set to put together this kind of tour, or whatever the case is, most of those things, those skills did not come from schools for me. A lot came from my church, my black church. Most of the musicians I know learned how to play instruments in those churches and not in schools. I learned how to speak publicly in that church system. There were people in my community when I was playing basketball and coaches that taught me other things. I think that there's a lot of pressure that we put on an ailing school system that has failed us over and over and over. And I'm glad that we have educators like Ish, but it's not just Ish. Like, where are our people in our communities? The first entrepreneurs I've ever seen are barbers. Like, they just are. And shout out to the ESPM Barber Shop here in Philadelphia. They cut me up yesterday, but I saw something I've not been seeing in Oakland and Chicago as much as I used to. It was filled with kids. There were kids outside, and there were kids running in and out of that barbershop, and those elders there like spent time with them and talked to them and watched them jump rope and like counted who can jump rope the most in between haircuts. And I think Philadelphia is still one of those cities that has that communal piece. But Ish, I wanted to throw it back to you because you're a social studies educator, and there's a lot of social things that's happening here, and you are an educator that's on the front lines. Are there anything that we should be knowing about that's happening in Philadelphia that you want to shine a light on that might be impacting you either professionally, personally, or both? Well, and you don't have to if you don't want to.
Well, I just all I gotta say is that, you know, when it comes to being able to have difficult conversations with colleagues and with our students, and from the diversity of our students, right? I believe that it's necessary. We're just right now in a political climate, right? And we see this across the country with 18 states that have laws against what we just do on a normal basis when we talk about Black people, you know what I mean? But when we speak on, you know, the current issues that are that's happening across the world with other countries, right? That has produced a situation where if you do not promulgate that country's propaganda line, like the state's line, that therefore you are being discriminatory towards that group of people. And in Philadelphia, we're feeling that. We've seen that in New York. It's mostly been talked about on the post-secondary level, But here in Philadelphia, recently, as of yesterday, I was even doxxed and being accused of being anti-Semitic simply because I'm not going to cancel certain educators who I know are really great educators, been doing it for, over a decade, that have proven track record. And I refuse to cancel them when it comes to putting them in positions to deliver professional development content that's not even related to the issue that's happening across, over there. Has to do with issues affecting, African-American history, which is a required subject here in Philadelphia, or has something to do with civics education, right? Not even touching the issue, but just the fact that I'm not promulgating that line, that I'm not willing to bow down and cower and be like, okay, whatever you say, that person will never be able to present for me again.
Wow.
You know what I mean? They've sent a truck outside my work yesterday and even sent one of those trucks to dox me at my house.
What is dox? I'm not familiar with that term.
It's kind of like, it's a different word than harass. It's kind of like to put you on blast in front of everybody in your community.
They usually push your address, like doxing.
So when you're doxing, it's investigating a person's, all of their personal address, all their personal stuff you can put out in the world. So you're basically researching a person for nefarious purposes. That's what doxing is.
So, and like putting their address out publicly.
The doxing actually is something that oppositional research people do constantly on other people to cancel them, to smear them. So what happened to you is a national effort, though. Those trucks that show up in front of people's houses with
somebody
their pictures
pays for
on
that
it or whatever. Someone's paying for that to happen. So
that's crazy.
Well, I'm working on being a better human being, brother. So first off, before we go anywhere else, I mean, how are you feeling? Like, how did that feel when that happened, and how are you doing right now?
I mean, like, tell you the truth, like, I'm not naive. Like, I came into this, John, like, very clear that one day I probably will be investigated. You know what I mean? Just, I never thought it would be off of some nonsense like this. Also, I never would have thought that opposition would translate into someone paying for a billboard truck and to have my photo up on that, John. Now, they did have a photo from, how long ago was that? 8 years ago. So I ain't too mad at him.
Said I look good on that truck.
Listen, they love me, they hate me, but they still say I look good though.
But ultimately at the end of the day, when it was outside my job, it was more of like, oh, whatever, like, you're gonna talk smack, whatever, that's messed up. I wasn't too angry, right? But when it got outside my neighborhood, and then like, I was even like in my crib taking a nap, and my son woke me up. And he's like, "What's that truck doing outside?"
And how old is your son?
He's 17. This one's 17. But the 12-year-old came in afterwards and was like, "What's going on?" You know what I mean?
How is that okay?
It isn't. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't understand how that's okay.
Like, what has to happen in order for that? Because, you want to respect the freedom of speech and for people to be able to, exercise how they feel. But when you have to be concerned about your child and like someone showing up to your door, like, how is that okay? And how can we use those? How are people able to use those types of techniques to cancel someone when that in itself should be canceled? And is a huge violation of someone's privacy and own freedom,
I mean, and as we start to wrap up and, kind of go into these final thoughts, I'll start by responding to that. Chris, I'd love to hear your thoughts and we'll go there. But I think there's a few things. I think one, the great educators that we do have in our community, they got to feel protected by us. Like that's a war crime, like that is overstepping the line, especially somebody who is so essential to the youth of that, to our youth. I think that's what the new Niagara is for, right? Like in the spirit of Du Bois and even in the spirit of Booker T. Washington, even though those cats had beef, what those two left are separate legacies that kind of intertwine around what Black people would be able to do, what we would be able to learn, how we would be able to think. And if somebody is going to attack our educators for not stifling an already stifled curriculum for our kids, that has to be seen as a war crime. It has to be seen as something so dangerous. Again, I keep coming back to this and I'll continue to. how slave masters could do anything they wanted to their slaves or enslaved people, except teach them how to read, because a Negro that can read is not fit to be a slave. So a Negro that understands like how to read and utilizes information and do social studies and do math and like be able to look at the Philadelphia city and see things and like make decisions for themselves. If you're trying to make that kid illiterate to being able to get knowledge, and you're to the point where you're threatening the safety and sanity of one of our educators, I think that there should be some type of appreciation for that educator on our end, but also protection to where you feel like, look, this is a really uncomfortable situation, but you should never have to feel alone in that situation again. And why would you have teachers and educators that last more than 5 years if this the type of thing that could happen?
You know what? It kind of reminds me of like, so we're 70 years from Brown versus Board, right? And when you think about what had to happen for us to have integrated schools and that imagery of like the little girl being protected by the National Guard to go into the school system. And at the same time, all the people outside with the picket signs yelling, like it's almost that same imagery now with the protection of our educators, though, and like putting it in context of like, how do we make sure that we are protecting rightfully what is ours to be protected, and at the same time, diminishing those tactics that are bully tactics and harassment tactics that do not have place here. They have a place, but this is not the place.
So, you know, my feeling about this, number one, is that you're in good company. Me, Charles, all of us, we have a network of individuals that we know that have at least been through one of these. Sometimes 2 or 3. And sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you feel alienated and alone and marginalized. Even what you just said, Jay, like about that picture of the one girl is kind of a false picture, because actually the Black community was collective. And during all that, but America loves to single out the one. That's how they get you. They separate you from your people. And right now, you're in good company. Like, show me a Black man your age that is out there saying something important that hasn't had one of these yet. And I've said it a million times. You heard me say this. Like, the devil is not concerned with you until you're doing God's work.
Yeah.
As long as you're not doing God's work, the devil don't pay no attention to you. The devil just like lets you be, right? It doesn't feel good when you're in it, when the family is involved. I don't know. People think they bulletproof when they come to your house, right? And you should show them what these bullets do.
I tell you, I'm in Texas right now.
Right?
Ain't nobody bulletproof in Texas.
Ain't nobody bulletproof, so you should show what these bullets do.
Yeah.
But to wrap it up, like with the Niagara thing, I read something I didn't know, that the reason that they chose Niagara was because of the force of the water that pushed forward couldn't be stopped. When you look at the Niagara, what's that?
I said, wow. Yeah. Say that one more time. That was
so the reason they chose that as the symbolism is because of the power of the water, actually, when it was all together in Niagara, could not be stopped. So they were trying to start a movement that was so collective, so powerful, so strong that it couldn't be stopped. It couldn't be prevented, just like Niagara, the Niagara Falls. And, you know, Dr. King talks about the waters of justice rushing down and that whole thing. That requires something bigger than our individual stuff that we do. That requires a collective acknowledgement of our condition and our power. What should we do? And that's what I think they were doing with the Niagara movement. So this that you are starting right now, I love it. And I just love the part that I love the most about it is we get to be with each other. Like, you are not alone. I'm not alone. You're not alone. If we're alone, we're dying.
Yeah.
You know, Public Enemy said it. Move as a team, never move alone. Right. Welcome to the terror zone.
And before our close, man, I wanted to, you're our esteemed guest. I wanted you to be able to, have any final reactions to what we said based off that. And also just, I was thinking about your son seeing that. I'm glad he was older, but just like, what does that do to his son moving, moving forward? I mean, I think you can do a bunch of things, maybe some of them even positive, like, no, my daddy is important enough to, these cats had to do this, but also probably how you reacted as a father that your son saw that. And then too, just, what we should probably expect just later on when we have our conversation here, like we did in Memphis. So take as much time as you need, man. And again, thank you for being with us, Ish.
Oh no, man, this is dope. I wish we had more time, man. Like every time.
I mean, don't give me a reason to come back to Philly and do this more, brother. Maybe once a month, brother. Go ahead.
I'm down. I gotta say I appreciate everybody's words on that. And we also need to be very clear that we headed for them times, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of what happens. And like in November, I ain't even talking about that. we're at that like time period where it's like, regardless of whatever the outcome is, we're going to be placed in a situation that has created the circumstances for the situation to exist. And so like what we facing now is probably just the beginning. So I just definitely want to preface it like that. And that's why I was saying I wasn't naive. I was fully clear with, like, when number one, I always joke with people that they messed up by allowing me to be in the position I am in right now. Because when I was a classroom teacher, I was just talking smack behind a closed door to like 30 students at a time, you know what I mean? But now, like, I'm able to shift that platform. The issue then becomes what we're facing now, where it's even just little things, just the image of potentially something going against what folks thinks need to be going on. And you get this type of reaction. And I think we're just seeing the tip of that iceberg of that reality that is happening to us right now, especially in education. And I think that, you know, there will be forces that will try to use our folks against each other. Obviously, we know that will flood money into certain areas for certain type of ideologies and political, you know, posturing and partisan, you know, angles. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we need to remember what, you know, the purpose of education is, right? And Dr. King talked about that, right? To build true character, you know, that's what true education is, to build a person, not just to have the box checking ability of the skills necessary, but also build a righteous human being. And, you know, in Philadelphia, that's always been my goal as an educator, as a teacher. Like, when I entered in the classroom in Philadelphia, I was like, if I can just reach one student in like my whole time here, I've done my job. And obviously, we all know that it's much more complicated and that it's much more nuanced. But the fact that, you know, there's tons of folks going into education now with that mentality, we need to shore those up, protect those folks, learn from the lessons that are happening right now, that are happening not just there's teachers across this country that are getting in trouble for having Black Lives Matter signs in their classrooms. You know what I mean? So we really need to prop those folks up, and also like learn this. You know, back in the day, they fired teachers for being communist. They fired teachers for blacklist. You know what I mean? So like this stuff ain't new. It's actually part of the course. And are we ready now? Have we efficiently or effectively learned the lessons necessary from this society to navigate effectively going forward? So I would say that's a challenge, not just here in Philadelphia. That's a challenge in Memphis and Chicago and Detroit. You know what I mean? Houston and Milwaukee. You know, the list, you can just keep on going down the list.
I wouldn't go these rural Black places. I live in Kentucky, you know, my grandmother, but there's a Black community there in a rural place, and it's similar, you know what I'm saying? And you can, the town is there's Confederate flags all, you know, peppered throughout, you know, in that place. But I think that, you know, all these places are equally impacted. Before I do the signature closeout, is there any, I just want to make sure, you know, I know it sucks when you can't get that last thought out. So.
Well, I was just thinking about, I want to make sure that we as a collective operate off of power and not fear. And I think that what you just named and thinking from my own perspective, like, are we ready? We always been ready. We are a community that always shows up and has always prevailed in adversity. That's where they underestimate us. So like to call you gritty Philly is okay because, you know, Andrew Duckworth had the book about what is grit, and Harvard had this whole education. So now grit is a good word.
Well, I said gritty, but I got a whole thing going at grit, but yes.
But the reality of it is that, you know, and to your point about what are our successes, we ready.
I like that.
That's what's up. Well, I will say this. This is why we're doing the new Niagara, and we done Memphis already. We'll be having conversations here in Philly after this conversation tonight. I'm looking forward to that, and then we go to the other cities. But what we're doing is we're gathering research and gathering data from people like Ish or like parents or like Miss Sarah Carpenter, like from that are doing this work on the ground, so it can help inform and educate leaders and grass tops and political platforms. But we're going to be led by data, by people, and by purpose, and by legacy in this new Niagara. So for our brother Sharif, Ish, Jay, Chris, I am Charles, and we will see you at our next stop in Atlanta.